You do indeed. Thank you for that very kind introduction, and I'm really looking forward to speaking with everybody today. I hope there'll be some interesting questions. I will present my slides as well. Are you seeing my screen come through now?
We can, Leigh. Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well then, unless you have any more, unless you want to have any more chat right now, we'll take it away, and then perhaps we'll have questions at the end.
All yours, Leigh. Yep.
All right. Thank you so much. Act 1 is a world obsessed with storytelling. Well, as you just heard, storytelling is a huge buzzword in market research. Everybody has heard about storytelling the last few years. If you go to Google and search for market research storytelling, how many results do you think you are going to get? I'll let you guess that in your own head. Well, the answer is 29 million results. It's a very, very popular topic, a popular technique. You'll see, everything from companies telling you how to tell stories with data, Green Book, one of the industry's publishers, articles on LinkedIn, Research World, from SMR, the Insights Association. You hear it from everybody. What is the power of storytelling and the importance of storytelling? You'll have our MRS in the UK had a storytelling summit this year, all about the different techniques and different applications of storytelling. SMR has a storytelling masterclass, and even the MRSI has had how to find the story in the data. You had a webinar back in 2019 talking about how to find the story. And of course, storytelling is important. Storytelling is a powerful technique. And I'm sure that if all of the people listening have not yet been to a storytelling masterclass or course or workshop, then it's probably because you've been teaching a storytelling masterclass yourself. However, storytelling is limited. So let's say this is you, the researcher. I hope Pankti will forgive me. This is a former colleague of mine who picture I have used here as a good example of someone who is using storytelling. But imagine that you are working on storytelling. Well, what does that mean? What is that? What does your storytelling relate to? Who does that relate to? Well, largely your storytelling is about the relationship between you and your CMO or your other stakeholders. It's about you telling a research story that will persuade them to take action. And that is important, of course, but it is just that relationship between those two people. Or maybe if you have more stakeholders, perhaps it's a few people or a dozen people. But storytelling, when you are the storyteller, is quite a narrow activity because it's only binding together these small number of people. But there are a lot of other people out there. There's almost 8 billion people out there in the world, and they are not a part of your storytelling in most cases, unless you are, maybe you're a movie producer or something like that. You're not mostly storytelling with those people. What you're doing is storytelling just to your stakeholders. But those people should really be involved. Those people are the people we want to do research with. And so what I want to talk to you today about is the art of story hearing. So how can we listen to and hear the stories from those 8 billion people? And how can we make that part of our research process? And how can we then transform those stories into our own stories that perhaps we still do pass up the chain to those stakeholders? So what is it about story hearing that is important? Why does it matter, and how can we start to do it? Well, we have 8 billion voices out there. All those people have got things to tell. Those are the people that we want to understand as researchers. Those are the human beings that we want to, whose voice, whose personality, whose experiences we want to represent into the businesses that we work with. And right now, maybe we think we're hearing those voices, But usually we are just asking questions. And those questions, in most cases, have got a fixed set of multiple choice options. We're analyzing the answers numerically with charts, with statistical significance, with all of the great statistical techniques that we rightly use. But we're taking a very limited extract of those people's lives by asking those questions. And if you talk to those people naturally, if you meet them in the street, if you hang out with them for a coffee, then you're going to hear some stories. Everybody has got hundreds of stories, thousands of stories to tell. It could be from your first memory as a child. It could be the last time that you ate in a restaurant. It could be the worst storm that you had experienced last year. It could be a story about your friend, your cousin. It could be a story about your work and your job, or an interview you had, or something that happened to you. We have all of these stories. If every person has 1,000 stories to tell, then there are 8 trillion stories out there. And we want to learn what those are. That's an immense source of insight, of data. And I'll explain why that is. Stories are so important because humanity is a storytelling species. We evolved as a teller of narratives. This was if you imagine people in the very early days, hundreds of thousands of years ago, painting these paintings to tell each other what happened to them. One of the reasons that stories became so powerful and what they enabled us to do as a species is to share experiences. So other animals, earlier animals, had to go and have an experience in order to learn from it. If they wanted to find out that the saber-toothed tiger was dangerous, they would have to go out, meet one, maybe get eaten, or at least run away and learn, oh, I better not do that again. But with stories, humans are able to pass this knowledge on to each other. And so that is one of the key things that enable humans to develop fast, to learn, to be a powerful species, and to survive in this challenging world, was our ability to share stories, to both tell them and to understand them. And those stories that might have been told around the campfire thousands of years ago have evolved in modern day into, for example, the fairy tales that we heard as children, or the myths that we have all learned as we grew up. And those now have turned into the decisions that we make as adults, because every choice that you make has a story behind it. Every time you consider, shall I buy this product? Shall I read this book? Shall I take this job? Shall I go on a date with this person? You tell a story to yourself. A story is going on inside your mind about what would the outcome be if I make this choice? What should happen? What could happen? What do I want to happen? Will it make me happy? If it has a happy ending, then we'd probably say, yes, I'm going to make that choice. So stories, they may have started as a way to share dangers or share opportunities with our fellow humans. They are now the subconscious stories, the unconscious stories that we tell and hear from ourselves are really, really important for all of the choices and the decisions that we make. So stories, one, they evolved as a way for humans to prepare for new situations before they happen. Now they help consumers immerse themselves. So if you help a consumer to tell a story to themselves and to you about the situation they're in, for example, I went to the supermarket, I'm buying these products, or I wanted to buy a car or a bike, and this is what happened, and this is what I was thinking, and this is what I chose. Those stories help people to place themselves in a real mindset, which gives you much more accurate, realistic answers than just asking survey questions. And they also allow people to open up. They will reveal more than usual if they are telling stories compared to if you're asking them questions in a survey. So if stories are so valuable, how can we go and find them? How can we get these stories that we're going to learn from? Well, there are a lot of places that you can gather stories from. For example, if you do an NPS survey, then often you'll ask people, why did you give that score? Maybe they'll tell you a little story in there. On social media, you could look at what people are sharing. People tell stories within social media. In qualitative transcripts, and to acknowledge the history that qualitative researchers have had of listening to stories. It has always been an important technique within qualitative research, but what I'm talking about here is being able to take that from the qualitative world into the quantitative world. You could even have people send you a WhatsApp voice note and write down the stories from there. But the most important thing is that you should ask for them. Asking for stories by going out to a panel, by going out to a recruited set of respondents, is really the key way to get that insight. Social media, for example, is quite limited because, one, you have a certain type of person who's on social media, which is not everybody. And secondly, the things that people talk about on social media are a specific kind of topic. There's a bias in their subject matter. So if you want to understand from perhaps an older consumer, or you want to understand something about their everyday life that they wouldn't talk about on Twitter, then you need to ask. And there's a technique for asking, which is that we both, when we want to hear stories, then we also need to share our own stories. You need to give something to get something back. You start a conversation. This sharing of stories is a very natural human activity, where if I tell you a story about my life, perhaps you'll tell me something back. So use stories as a prompt to get more stories. If you share a story of your own, or perhaps share a story from another respondent, then you're likely to trigger a respondent sharing their story back to you. And so this creates a positive cycle where people open up and they tell you more and more about their lives, and you will learn things that you would never know that you could have asked for. Could be as simple as saying, tell me a story about something that happened when you went shopping. Tell me why you started to care about the environment, or what's the worst dinner that you have ever ordered. These are just some of the simple prompts. And if you imagine that I tell you about the worst meal that I ever had, then you're going to feel quite engaged and perhaps willing to tell me about the worst one that you ever had. In my case, it was a Mexican restaurant in Spain, and I think you'd think Mexican food in Spain might be quite good, but this was a tourist town, and all of the sauces tasted like somewhere between sweet chili sauce and soap. And it was absolutely disgusting. So but that little story might help remind you of some terrible dinner that you had once that you could share back to me. So how many stories do you want? Well, I suggest 12,000. 12,000 stories gives you a very rich database that you can analyze, that you can get different trends from, that you can understand the distinctions between different people. So usually when we're going out and collecting stories with a client, that's our aim. Some of them will be very short, some of them will be longer, but we get our 12,000 stories. And then what do we do? So imagine I've told you this story about this horrible Mexican dinner in Spain. What can you do with that? Now, you've got a lot of text. If you have 12,000 stories, you probably have 1 million words of text. So how can you use that 1 million words? Well, there are, of course, standard text analysis, sentiment analysis approaches, but I'm going to show you something that makes the story hearing as a technique a very, very powerful one, and something that allows us to really do something rich and useful with those stories that goes beyond typical text analysis. And this is something that if you have done a storytelling masterclass or workshop, you probably recognize. What does every story have? We probably taught it in school. Every story has got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And those are not just 3 things that happen in that order. The beginning, the middle, and the end each has its own distinct role in the story. They each have their own different emotional significance and significance as to what the story is about. The beginning of the story is how things used to be. So before this happened, how was my life? and then something happened. What was it that happened that triggered the story to be told? The middle is the consequences. The middle is, well, something happened, then what? What happens after the initial part of the story? The middle is the body of the story. It's a series of events, each one following from the previous one. And then finally, how it turned out at the end. So what does the end of the story look like? And that's the natural storytelling structure that we all think about and that we all respond to as human beings. But it's not just a series of events in sequence, it's also what's a causality relationship. So you have to have because of that and because of that. Each event has to happen because of the event before. That's what makes it a story. That's what binds these events together. And those causal relationships are what we can really, really learn from. Those are telling us the underlying psychological drivers that lead the story to happen. So for example, if the story is about me going to buy a car, well, the beginning is, why did I need a car? Why did I decide to buy a car? And the because and the middle then tells me, well, because of that, I went to look for this kind of car. I explored these options. I did this research. I tried a few different models of car. And then because of that, I finally chose this particular car, and this was the consequence. The consequence hopefully was that I was happy with the car, that it was a new electric car, so it's better for the environment. But what you've learned there is you've learned what is it that triggers the purchase of a car, what are the considerations and the reasons that that makes me think about, and what is the end result, and is my need state ultimately fulfilled? And so every story that somebody naturally tells will have these three stages, and you can understand when you understand the becauses, then you're going to understand what drives the story and what drives that human behavior that we want to understand. Here's a similar structure, a little more detailed, which is used by the movie company Pixar. So Pixar, when you want to come up with a new story, a new movie that you want them to produce, you've got to pitch it to them. And you pitch it like this. Once upon a time, that's the beginning. Every day, that's everything that was happening every day, the boring world that existed, until one day. That is what's called your inciting incident. That's what starts the story. So you have the beginning of your story. This is your setup, and this is really important for the world that the movie is living within. Because of that, so this is what happens as a result of that incident. And then because of that, so you have you have at least two sets of events that happen until finally ... And then finally they live happily ever after. They get married. They go off into the sunset. They become the leader of their village, whatever the story might be. And if you look at any Pixar story, whether it's the Wall-E, the Incredibles, Toy Story, you will see those same structures in that order. And that's going to be there probably in any film that you watch. I haven't watched much Bollywood, but I think you'll find those classic story structures will be there just as they are in Hollywood movies, just as they are in TV series and books. So the point is that every story has a structure. A story is not just a series of words. A story has a structure. And so here's an example of how we went out and got some of those stories. So our client was in a TV station in the UK. They wanted to understand about TV viewing and the ways that people watch TV, the reasons, and how they could make their TV programs better. So we asked them, the consumers, the viewers, for some stories. Tell us about a TV program that's meaningful. Tell us your memories about TV. And we gave them a few more prompts about who were you watching it with and where were you? And they responded in their own words, either by writing the answer or by narrating it in voice. Well, here is some of the answers that we got. As you could see, there is a lot of text, and this is only a small fraction of the thousands of stories that we had. But I'm going to zoom in on one of these and show you how we broke that down and what we could learn from it. So this is one story that somebody told about their husband and how they used to sit on the sofa, watch these TV shows, and how they felt about it. So let's first look at our story structure. Well, you have the beginning. So we have on starting our life together. My husband and I used to sit in the sofa after finishing our dinner. That's the setup. That's the scenario. The middle is what happened next. So we would then prepare our cup of tea. We would snuggle up together and we'd watch one of our favorite programs. So, and then here are some examples of what programs could have been on. And then finally, they were days of laughter and inspiration, and I have good memories about them. So what we have here is we have the trigger that starts the consumption occasion. We have the consequences and what are the details of what they consume it with, and how they feel while they're doing it. And then finally, what did that leave them with at the end? It clearly made this person happy. They're remembering the probably nostalgically, maybe this person's husband is no longer around, but the memories are still there. And that is how those TV shows have made that person feel. We can also go into a bit more detail. So we can analyze who was involved in the experience, when did it happen with a time marker, other categories that are consumed, what some of the individual brand names were, and the emotions that people, that this person felt about them. So we're able to get a lot of detail about the relationships between, for example, different brands and different emotions through these stories. So that's an example, but what else can we do with those elements and with this data? Well, we collect our 12,000 stories from all these people. We put them through this analysis engine, and then here are some of the things that it produces. So we create a category landscape map. This map shows you, for example, in this case, what do people think about comedy? What are the, and TV comedy, what are the associations they have? What are the emotions, and how, and what channels do they want to look for that comedy from? We can pull out key category narratives. So the key stories that people tell themselves about the category, and I'll show you an example of those. We have then what are called disruption points. So this is where can you change the story? People might tell themselves a story that isn't perfect for your brand. Maybe you want to change it. We can pull out individual verbatim. So you saw lots of examples there of the particular stories that people told, and that often helps give more depth and more richness to a presentation that you are sharing. And finally, we get business actions. So we get to know what are the events of that story that you can change in your business to give your brand a better chance of being a supported character in that story. Your brand isn't going to be the hero of a story in most cases because the consumer is the hero of their own story. But your brand can be one of the supporting characters, and that's really where you want to understand where could your brand play a role in that story. And all of this we call System 3. You might have heard of in behavioral science about System 1 and System 2. Well, System 3 is the imagination. System 3 is what we call the part of the brain that processes narratives, that creates, that allows us to simulate in our minds and imagine what would happen if, where might I be if this happens? And what would, if I eat this product, will it taste good? Will it make me happy? Here's a snapshot of the map that came out of those text stories. So you've got the comedy, you've got some specific program names, you've got funny, which is a positive word that people like. And here is one of the narratives that came from that. So people have at the beginning of the story, they switch on the TV, they're looking for, they have a need state, they're looking for something light. And so there are different narratives they could follow, different ways that they could follow that need state. They could either go to avoid the news and be escapist, or they could look for something that's going to make them laugh. And if so, where will that lead them? What channel will they switch to, and what experience will they have? And those branching points are really key to know where in the customer journey can your brand have an impact. This is from the retailer Primark. which is a low-cost clothing retailer in Europe and the US. I don't know if, not sure if you have them in India. But this was the overall map, and from this we zoomed in on a few particular narratives. So here's one. Primark is for everyone, and for everyone relates to having clothes that are a good fit. So the message that we enable Primark to send there is that if you want to be for everyone, you want to show everyone that the Primark is relevant for them, then you tell them about the fact that they will always find something that to fit. Primark is cheap. That's another common narrative that they will hear. That's one of the things they're known for. But that actually is a branching narrative. That can go two different ways. It can go down towards throwaway clothes and sweatshops, which is a negative narrative, or it can go towards cheap being about special offers and good value. So they can see where they can influence the narrative to go in a direction that is better for their brand. These are some of the things that they could learn from those stories. I won't go into detail here, but there's another way that we can gather story information, which is a more prompted, guided process, where we start with a story and we ask people to give us the word associations that come from that story. We drill into the further associations from each of those words, and ultimately we ask them to fill in, tell us any words that we missed, and ultimately we build that same kind of map. So this is an alternative way of gathering stories that's more guided and doesn't rely as much on text analysis. So one of our clients is reinventing a couple of their brands based on the narratives in those maps. Another one is shaping their approach to health and sustainability. And another, and this is some of the work that I think is really powerful, is helping men to combat some negative narratives around a sexual health condition, and to feel more confident, and to feel that they don't need to be ashamed. And this is the kind of work that I think is really valuable, when you can uncover stories that allow you to really change people's lives. And finally, Act 5, how can these stories change the world? Well, just a few quick examples. We talked about Primark, wanted to know what do shoppers really expect from the store, and what narratives do they not want to be reminded of. Nando's is a restaurant here who used it with employees to understand what do new employees expect from when they join a new workplace, and how can they make sure that they give people what they want. Kingsford is a charcoal brand in the US, used it to test TV ads. They wanted to see which of those TV ads is giving people the narrative that their brand wants to tell, and so they could choose and optimize their TV ads. A couple that I can't tell you the name of, but this is a global healthcare company, discovered some of the narratives that stopped people from seeking health treatment when they should. And so that allowed them to create new design and new communications to help people access healthcare better. And a global beverage company got a new understanding of what consumers expect from sustainability and health, which are two of the huge topics in that sector at the moment, and helped set strategy across Europe for those priorities. So to summarize, hearing stories is the best way to tap into consumers' world, but especially their future world, because you can't often ask people about their future behavior, but the future that people experience will be determined by the stories that they tell about that future today. The structure of stories, the beginning, middle, end, allows you to quantitatively analyze these narratives and go beyond the qualitative analysis of stories that has traditionally been used. And that lets you learn what drives them and what stops them from buying your products. And the analysis of these stories can deliver everything from the map of the category, the unconscious narratives that are driving their experience of the category, and it will tell you what trends, the future trends that are going to emerge, that people are starting to experience. It'll tell you how to disrupt the existing narratives if you're a challenger brand, for example, and what actions you can take as a marketer or commercially. But the most important thing is that stories allow us to listen, and to listen particularly to people who might not always have been listened to. So when we tell those stories that we've heard from those 8 billion people, we tell those to the CMO or to our product managers. It's their voices that we're honoring, where we're able to pass on what really matters to real people. And stories both create what's distinctive about our cultures, but they also reflect what is common as human beings. So I would love to hear your stories. Please ask me questions if you have any. And I look forward to sharing stories with all of you from here on in the future.
Can you hear us, Leigh?
Yes, I hear you.
Great. It was, I mean, we were so glad to hear that story. I mean, it just kept us on the edge. And thank you so much for sharing that amazing stories. While we won't let you go that easily without a couple of questions that we have. So the very first question that we have is, can you tell us a little bit more about your journey to discover the technique? So if you can touch upon that for a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been for the last, as you said at the beginning, for the last 12, 15 years, I've been involved in behavioral science and understanding human psychology. And I realized in thinking about human psychology, I realized there is something missing from most of our understanding. We talk about the non-conscious, the intuitive responses. That's what we call system 1, and that's where I have an emotional reaction to a stimulus, or I touch a hot cooker and I jump because I know it's going to hurt me. And then we talk about system 2, which is where I do my calculations. So if I am planning the budget, or I'm deciding to borrow money, or I want to look at the monthly cost and my expenses, then I can use system 2 to do the calculations. But what was missing there is this understanding of how we use our imagination. And our imagination is so important. It really governs a large part of our experience of life. Any situation that you're in, you're immediately thinking forward, what might happen next, what could happen in the future, as well as thinking back, what happened before in my memories of similar situation. And all of that it's not this automatic non-conscious thoughts, but it's also not calculating. It's much more experiential. And I realized that actually stories are the thread that binds together that understanding of the imagination. And so that's what led me to think, you know what, there is a third type of thinking that goes on here. And listening to stories is how we can reveal and understand how people's minds work.
Wonderful. Right. Very true. Leigh, I'm sure, the next time we hear the word storytelling, I'm sure, immediately story hearing will come to our mind, as a very natural corollary. Now, your stories, have deep emotional connect, Leigh. Have you ever experienced any functional insight coming from this story hearing technique of yours? And have you ever used it differently? What you were doing earlier, but now by practicing this technique?
Yeah, well, functional insights come as well, because imagine you ask for a story about, so let's say this beverage company that I'm working with is one of the ones you will have heard of. We asked people to tell us a story of when you drink this drink, but also then what did you do with the packaging? So did you throw it away? Did you recycle it? If you saw somebody else not throwing away and not recycling, how did it make you feel? So we linked together. There was an emotional aspect, but there was a very functional aspect too. You get to understand what are the behaviors that people reveal through storytelling. That tells you a richer picture of behavior than if you just ask some specific directed questions. So there's lots to be got about functional behavior. Again, in the healthcare case, we also got to understand what was the research that people were doing to understand this health condition. Where did they find a treatment? If they didn't want to go to the doctor, did they find a non-conventional treatment somewhere else? So quite a lot of important functional insights that came alongside the emotional insight.
Right. I'll tell you what, Leigh, I'm sure just like me and Rakshit out here, even our audience would want to, continue hearing to this particular story for a long while. And I can see, multiple questions that we have received around this. But yes, we have the paucity of time again, and we need to
course.
go towards our wrap, for today's session.
No problem.
So thank you so much, Leigh,
Thank you,
for-
Leigh.
thank you.
Thank you
for
so
this
much.
entire, session and answering the questions. And I'm sure
Thank
there
you.
is a lot more that we have, but I'm sure we'll need a deeper masterclass for that.
That's fine. I will.
Yeah.
I'll try and answer some of the questions online in the Q&A. Thank
Definitely.
you, everybody.
For
Great to meet
sure.
you both. Bye.
Thank you, Leigh.